So we'll start with AI. We've all been following the news about AI load growth. According to the IEA, global data center electricity demand is projected to more than double from roughly 415 terawatt hours today to nearly 945 by 2030. That is a strain on grids, fuels, and critical minerals. At the same time, this technology that's driving this demand may also be our best bet for relieving it. Optimizing power plants, unlocking up to 175 gigawatts of additional transmission capacity on existing lines, and improving forecasting and efficiency across industry and buildings. In other words, the faster AI scales, the more strain it puts on the system, but also the more capability to manage that strain. So let's go right into the title of this session. As outlined, is AI the cause to, or it is the solution to our energy security needs? Ken, we'll start with you.
So when I think about it, I think, one, the electrification of the country is real. And I think that's a structural issue, not a cyclical issue. You were talking about load growth just within the last week in Texas. ERCOT, the grid operator, put out some potential growth numbers where they shared that by 2032, the load in the Texas market could increase by some 300,000 megawatts. That is a huge number. Now, they were quick to point out that they believe not all of that is going to materialize. But if you think about it, even if 1% of that materializes by 2032, only 6 years away, that's 3,000 megawatts. So that's 3 AP1000s, the large Westinghouse nuclear plants that Southern Company just built at Plant Vogtle, or that's 10 BWRX 300s, right? The plants that GE's building with OPG at the Darlington station. So that's a lot of building in only 6 years. So even if that 1% is closer to accurate, we better get started building. So I absolutely think the load growth is real. I also think that while AI may be driving a lot of that, it's not the only reason. You look at penetration of electric vehicles, manufacturing resurgence or onshoring, the fact that almost everybody in America has one of these and several tablets and other things that need charging. It is real, so it's not just AI, but that is a piece of it. And then to your point, I think AI and partnerships with firms like Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, who our company does business with, they are also part of the solution, because what it takes on the nuclear side, what it's going to take to build new nuclear plants, whether smaller or larger, are partnerships with companies. And our company is partnered right now with Meta, and this is all public, and we're going to uprate our 4 existing power plants in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and we're working on a data center project with Amazon at our Comanche Peak plant in Texas. So I think it is driving electrification needs, further growth in load, and it's a big part of what's going to enable that to happen.
Great. Roger, solution or a problem?
We at GE Vernova see it more as a solution, and I think I can explain why that is. And to us, the energy security importance of it being kind of the leading topic for us to challenge in the world predates the data center story, the AI story. I go back 4 years, a little more than that, to when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we saw for the first time, the challenges to not only the electrical grid in Ukraine, but a wake-up call in Europe that they had taken energy security for granted. And we started to see now energy security becoming the top topic, and that spread all around the world, whether it was not only concern about a physical war, but also cyber security, physical attacks on the grid that we saw in the United States, weather events. All these things over the last couple of years had been created an opportunity to put energy security first and foremost as a policy decision. We'd been ringing the bell, energy security, we cannot take the grid for granted anymore, we have to do it. It's only been the last 2 years that AI has been kind of driving the narrative it is today, even more recently in the last year than 2 years ago. And what has been positive about the AI discussion as it relates to energy is we no longer have to ring the bell. For the first time, our customers and our partners are making the investments at scale to solve for energy security. AI can be something of a catalyst to make the investments that we've been saying need to be made to solve for all those energy security issues. So we're seeing much more of the opportunity for this to serve energy security, to make those investments at scale. And I agree with the point that this demand is not just being driven by AI or data centers. You could argue it's 4% to 8%. We're seeing onshoring of manufacturing, industrialization, kind of a worldwide space race that no longer are people taking electricity for granted. It is now the lifeblood of society, of prosperity. And the world is rushing now, for the first time since World War II, the first super cycle to electrify. So AI is something of the driver, of the catalyst. It's taking a certain amount of that growth, but the investments we're seeing being made far outweighs that, and it's really resetting the tables to kind of meet the gap that had long been there to solve all these broader issues of energy security.
Gerry, how about from Microsoft's perspective?
So it's both a challenge and an opportunity, right? On the challenge side, as a company that is a large builder of infrastructure, AI infrastructure around the world that requires energy, we know that we need a license to operate from the communities where we build, right? And that's where you're seeing the challenge really materialize in ways we hadn't seen in the past, right? We need community buy-in, we need community support. The issue of energy prices, the issue of natural resources, the issue of partnerships in local communities, right? That's what we're focused on the challenge side, because as we're seeing throughout the country and really throughout the world, we're seeing more resistance to some of this infrastructure being built. And so we think it's incumbent on our industry to really lean in and talk to communities about the investments that we're making and what they're going to mean to benefit communities, not just the benefit of AI, but the benefit of having data center infrastructure and energy infrastructure and other types of infrastructure in their community. So it's critical that we actually focus on building trust and getting that license to operate from local communities, whether we're building a data center or an energy plant to power it, or the transmission infrastructure to move the electrons. On the opportunity side, I'll totally agree with what the other panelists said and just add a few things. I think there's a unique moment here where my industry in particular is putting a huge demand signal into the market for all types of energy, right? And really can help propel new energy technologies, hopefully to the fore. We have put at least 35 gigs of renewables into the market just in the past few years. I mean, that's an incredible number, my company alone. And as we look forward to the future and the energy needs of AI, I think that's only going to get bigger, right? So we're putting a huge demand signal into the market for solar, for wind, for batteries, for nuclear, really all of the above. And I think that's a good thing. It sends a signal to all the folks that actually build and power this infrastructure that we're here and that there's long-term demand. It's also critical that we focus on the partnerships, not just the demand, right? You mentioned a few of them earlier, both of you. Our company's laser focused on working within the ecosystem to ensure that we actually can build the technology future, the supply chain future here in the United States, right? We're partnered with Corning, just announced last year that we're going to be building out new hollow core fiber factories in North Carolina. Hopefully that hollow core fiber that we are building will be in our data centers in short order and make them more energy efficient, right? We're partnered with Q-Cells in Georgia to build the solar cells here domestically for all the solar generation that we're looking to power our data center infrastructure. And so, you know, there are both challenges out there, but there's huge opportunities as well.
So Ken, given you're the Chief Nuclear Officer for Vistra, let's start there. Nuclear has been an underutilized part of the US energy mix for too long. How do you see this playing out in the next 10 to 20 years for nuclear?
Yeah, so I think this is a great catalyst to drive increased use of nuclear in the country. I will say I'm a lifelong nuclear guy, right? So that's how I see the world. But for Vistra as a whole, I agree with what Gerry said. So our company, we own, when we close our last announced deal, about 50,000 megawatts of generation. And we are an all of the above company. About 60 to 70% of that is natural gas fired generation, but we own coal, we have solar, we have wind, we have battery storage, and we have 6,400 megawatts of nuclear power at 4 stations. So we believe we need all of that, just like Gerry said, to help meet the moment. Specifically for nuclear, what we're seeing is a great demand for that power because it's almost like it's built to meet this moment, right? We are 24/7, almost always on. Since 2012, the US nuclear fleet has driven capacity factors in excess of 90% across the board. So we generate carbon-free power. We're always there. So it's got to be part of the mix. Over the next 10 to 20 years, what I see is magnification of the things that you see today, right? Our deal that I announced with Meta is to uprate our existing power plants in Ohio and Pennsylvania. That will get a total of about 430 additional megawatts out of those units. And uprating is a fancy term, but it's really just like dropping a big block engine in a small block Chevy, right? You get more horsepower, you get more power out of the machine, and that's what an uprate is. So we'll use uprates to increase the output of the existing fleet. We'll restart shut power plants like Microsoft's doing with Constellation and bringing back the Crane Energy Center. I think now there aren't that many shutdown plants, but we'll use that as much as we can. We'll use uprates as much as we can. And then as we go forward, GE is currently building the BWRX 300 at the Darlington station with OPG. So I think over the next 10 to 20 years, we will see large or small power plants, nuclear plants being built with more frequency. If you want 24/7 carbon-free power, nuclear has to be part of the solution set.
Great, and we'll talk more about the immediate, midterm, long-term sort of strategies and goals we need. Roger, for GE Vernova, your technology, installed turbines, generation equipment, it's part of roughly a quarter of the world's electricity generation. What's it like to be doing business right now? So given surging demand from data centers for gas turbines, transformers, and grid equipment, how does this change how you think about doing business?
Well, thank you. So it's about a quarter of the world's electricity, a third outside China, 50% in the United States, and it's 9:19 on a Monday morning. And so what that means is that our 23 factories in the United States, we have about 36 people punching a time card right now for the first time in one of our factories, helping our customers meet the demand and the capacity they need. And so our role is to serve the need to grow capacity, to serve our customers, to serve these markets so that we can achieve these goals of energy security that we've spoken about, whether AI or otherwise. And so just in the last year alone, we had about 18,000 people working in 18 factories in the United States prior to the inauguration. Today, that's 23,000 people working in 23 factories in the United States. And about a year later, we've invested $1.3 billion, about added 1,800 jobs. So I'd love it if you could come see our factory in Greenville, South Carolina, where we make gas turbines, Wilmington, North Carolina, where we make our nuclear equipment, Pensacola, Florida, our wind turbines, Charleroi, Pennsylvania, where we make electrification equipment. And we're just getting started. I was really moved by the video coming in, because I grew up in an industrial area. I believe in factories. I think factories are art. I think trains are music and machines are magical. And we're a company that we don't have to do these things from scratch because we've always been doing it. This has always been our commitment to the United States, to have this strong industrial base here. Everything you saw in that opening video, we believe in industrialization. And this has been a great catalyst just for us to do more jobs, more workforce training, more trades and vocation, 3,000 people every Monday punching that time card for the first time, making technologies in this country that no other place can make in the world. It's that high tech to make a gas turbine or a small modular reactor. So that's the role that we've played. We're seeing, significant increases in capacity that we've announced pretty formally during earnings calls and things like that. You can track some of those. And as I said, just getting started in terms of understanding the role we play with humility to be able to serve these markets, to serve these governments, and to serve our customers so that we succeed on these goals of energy security.
Well, I can't speak for the audience. I'm inspired hearing that. And I think that's really part of a very inspirational story around AI in particular. That has not always proven to be the case at a state and local level. I'm certain we've all heard stories about the sort of NIMBYism that we've seen on the rise when it comes to AI and data centers. Gerry, I'd love for you to explain a little bit of how Microsoft has approached that very specific challenge. How do you think about your community-first AI infrastructure? And how are you addressing the sort of energy and natural resources questions that, that folks on the ground are asking?
Well, it's absolutely critical, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about having that license to operate from communities. This build-out of infrastructure is historic. It's unprecedented in its scale and its speed. And it really requires companies like Microsoft, and frankly, the entire industry, to lean into this community-first concept. So in January, we announced from our Vice Chair and President, Brad Smith, our community-first AI infrastructure commitments. And it's focused on really the whole gamut of things that are impacting communities on the ground, right? Energy, water, jobs, taxes, and skilling. There are really 5 buckets where we made a series of commitments. On the energy front, we leaned in and said, hey, we are going to pay for the energy that we consume and for the upgrades to the grid that we think are necessary to move those electrons to our facilities, right? And that wasn't necessarily the industry standard or practice for many years, but we're trying to push it that way. So we think that's critical. We also signed President Trump's Ratepayer Protection Pledge alongside many of our peers in the industry. On the water side, equally important, right? That's a huge issue for so many communities, especially in the Southwest here in the United States. And our commitment is we're not going to just come in and take more water. We are going to put more water into a community, right? We're going to make sure that we are water positive. And we're doing that through technology, right? So these closed loop technologies and chip level water cooling, that allows us to be more energy efficient. Essentially, as I understand it today, we can now we can probably use the equivalent of 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water over the period of many, many years, right? That's about 20 homes. And so we have the ability to use technology and other investments into local natural resources to make sure that water's not an issue. On the jobs front, we announced the partnership with the North America's building trades. We are going to work together with the skilled trades across the United States to make sure that the folks that are building this infrastructure come from the local community, that we work on not only the jobs of today, but making sure we have a pipeline of workers to build that infrastructure for the coming years, right? We don't want to import workers into a community best we can. We'd like to make sure we're sourcing locally for those jobs. On the taxes front, we have made a commitment that we are not going to take property tax abatements from local communities anymore. It's critical that when you go into a community and you're building this infrastructure, you lean in and you say, hey, we're going to pay our fair share so that you have new finances to help the local schools and hospitals and libraries and things like that. And then finally, on the skilling front, it's still critical that we make sure that folks actually have the ability to learn and use AI, right? So through our skilling partnerships, through Microsoft Elevate, we are training millions and millions of people through local schools, K through 12, but also community colleges. And so, we really have to lean into these issues and show that we're a good steward in communities if we're going to have that license to operate.
Yeah, and go ahead, please jump in.
I was going to say, Avery, if I could add, so I agree with what you said. And on the partner side, so like our data center deal at Comanche Peak, right? We need to help our partner with that. So in that case, we're working with Amazon. We are a known, trusted partner in the community, right? That site started construction in 1970. So we've been in that community for a long, long time. They know us, they trust us. Our folks are part of that community. So when we announce these deals and these partnerships, we need to partner with the team and start early engagement with the community, understanding. And we've been doing that, and that's incredibly helpful. What we tell folks is, these corporations have the same values we do, right? Just like Gerry described. And so that early engagement, getting out to all the key stakeholders, opening up what you're doing to the community is vital. The other thing I would say, like Roger mentioned, bringing people out, right? You invited people to the factories, bringing elected officials or even local community members that haven't been out to the power plant sites, out to the site so they can see how we operate, talk to people there, the professionals that run those facilities day in and day out. That's our part, and we think that's a good partnership and a great way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great shift toward the solutions here, right? I mean, you both started talking about a lot of the ways that we can address many of the challenges that we're facing. And I think in particular, borrowing the particular strengths from the energy sector, who's got decades worth of experience on how do you engage communities with very positive stories about what you can do for their communities to really help the tech sector to understand with a maybe a much faster scale of change, how do you execute that same sort of a communications playbook? So on that theme of solutions, Roger, I want to talk a little bit about how GE Vernova is deploying things like software, maybe not as often thought about as that kind of middle layer between power generation and actual AI deployment. Things like Grid OS for substation automation and grid management. Can you walk us through how significant those sorts of capabilities can be and what sort of impact they might have?
I appreciate the not as often thought about. It's a very diplomatic way to say it, because what we see, if we go back to our theme of energy security, is people tend to go towards generation. And we love generation. We love gas turbines. We love small modular reactors. We love renewable energy. We love it all. We love the generation. But I think not as often talked about is this point. The grid itself, the world's most complex machine. And whether you're connecting data centers to the grid or doing it behind the meter, you need to get this all to work together. It's a combination of software and hardware. And maybe if I start with the software, I think that, again, in the last year, I'm more optimistic than I was a while ago. I think the world has waken up. I think the US has waken up. This has been a big part of Secretary Wright's and the Energy Dominance Council's agenda, is to lift that focus on the grid itself, how it works, the resiliency we build into it. We've upped our manufacturing capacity. We were always strong on producing capacity type equipment, not as strong in the US on this. We bought a transformer company for $5.1 billion to increase the capacity of manufacturing things like transformers here in the United States and switchgear, things you probably haven't thought about for a long time. But this is critical to energy security. As we learned in Ukraine, we don't have inventory sitting on the shelves. We need strategic reserves of this equipment. And just 2 weeks ago, the president announced through the Defense Production Act, a similar recognition that we can't make this fast enough. There needs to be more investment. So we're seeing, I think, a more realistic view that we have to elevate the role of electrification equipment. And the way you connect them to data centers and serve the loads of data centers, that's a whole nother story too, to make that all work together, something we're really proud of. And then you mentioned software, and I think there's more work to be done here. I think we have a receptive audience, but more work to be done, because the fastest thing we can do right now to increase the resiliency of the grid, to get more electrons out of it, to address energy security, is through software. So you mentioned our package, Grid OS, which orchestrates electrons in real time. Think of the grid. It was built as a one-way lane to move from point A to point B. We now have renewable energy. We have cybersecurity. We have threats of weather events. We have a superhighway now with electrons going all in different directions. And so Grid OS enables us to manage that in real time, to get the most efficiency and make sure that the grid is operating as well as possible against different threats. It can even have AI to do predictive things. If a storm's coming, it can tell a utility, it can tell Vistra, here's where your trucks need to be because we think this is where the impact's going to be. Let's get them lined up and ready to go. So I've been happy with the progress on electrification and the recognition. I'd like to see more on the software side, because if we could do one thing today really fast, really quick, to make the most amount of progress with, frankly, the least amount of investment, it would be on the software side.
Well, that's the sort of solution that policymakers often like, right?
Yes.
The one that can be done with very low lift, very high impact. And so I think telling that story in Washington is something I know our Center for Grid Security has spent a lot of time doing. On that theme of how AI can help drive these sorts of exciting advancements, Gerry, I wanted to talk a little bit about how Microsoft has been investing in AI tools for environmental and energy applications. In particularly, how quickly can AI realistically accelerate things like the discovery of new critical minerals deposits, or improving recycling or material efficiency? And what is holding that sort of transition and acceleration back?
Yeah, I don't know that it's being held back at the moment, right? I think we know now that these AI tools are highly capable at doing some of the things that Roger just said. But also when you're talking about, sort of sophisticated processes that are heavily data-driven, right? We now know that AI can change the game, right? So we are working with utilities right now, similar to what Roger just mentioned, to use AI to scan the grid, to find places where you can build efficiencies into the network, and really actually take time and resources and money out of it and return it back to the ratepayer at the end of the day, right? And so using AI with utilities to improve the grid is one area. We also see it in the recycling space as well, and for us, that's as much as a physical challenge as it is a digital one, right? Obviously, we're a huge maker of devices. We buy lots of servers and racks that go into our data centers, and this material has a shelf life, right? We're actually working with the government right now and with several of our partners in the industry to figure out, hey, how do we coordinate that so we have a whole of government and really maybe a whole of industry effort to use more of the components whose shelf life is being realized inside of our devices and our data centers and put them back in a circular way into the economy. Obviously, we have a processing challenge, right? A lot of that is that work has been done historically overseas. We need to figure out how to do that here at home. But making sure that large companies like mine, hyperscalers that are investing in tons of physical infrastructure that has a shelf life, getting that back into the economy, getting it recycled, I think can be a huge benefit for the supply chain. And then the last thing, going back to what I was saying before around, how AI can actually improve processes, just think about what it can do for permitting, right? We're working, and hopefully I didn't spoil a question that you have coming up here, but we're working with not only companies that are applying for permits in the nuclear and other spaces, but working with the agencies themselves. Several agencies, both at the federal and the local level, are still committed to almost paper, very human process-based processes. And so, AI is a game changer, right? And we're already seeing that you can build novel applications using AI for an agency, and you can also work with the company that's applying for that permit to really speed that time up, right? And I've heard everything from like 10 to 20x as far as how quickly we can make that process move more smoothly. So I'm fairly bullish in this space, and I don't think this is we're waiting 5 to 10 years for these things to come online. I think we have a huge opportunity right now.
Well, we're approaching the hour mark for an energy security conference, so we're contractually obligated to talk about permitting reform, so thank you for bringing it up. I'd love to kind of understand a bit more about when you talk to policymakers in Washington, particularly on the topic of permitting reform, how do you make it real for them of the challenges that you and the industry as a whole are facing when it comes to the sort of speed that we want to see from a national strategy, but the challenges with execution and implementation because of the onerous processes around permitting? You want to start, Gerry?
Yeah, sure. Well, I used to practice policymaking in a past career in life on Capitol Hill, and so I experienced this firsthand. And I think the debate has really changed just in the past few years here. You had some of the typical fights between Republicans and Democrats, and perhaps industry as well, around permitting reform. What type of permitting reform should we do, and for which industries? I now think folks are on both sides of the aisle are acutely aware that we need to fix this problem wholesale, right? For a long time, folks were saying, well, hey, you Democrats just want to do permitting reform for transmission so you can get more solar and wind on the grid, despite carbon-based fuels. I don't think that debate is happening anymore. And some of the conversations that I've been in the middle of, I think there's at least a recognition that we have to do all of the different types of permitting reform, whether it's for transmission, whether it's for the generation projects themselves, because we can't afford not to. And so when you look at legislation like the SPEED Act that's being debated in Congress right now, and some of the other proposals, I am fairly hopeful, at least from what I am hearing, that this finally may be the year. I know we've all been waiting for a long time for this, where we can see comprehensive permitting reform actually happen. And maybe it has to wait until after the elections and the midterms in the lame duck session, but it does seem like the ingredients are there now when you have this huge demand from AI and from other things and from electrification all up. Hopefully this is the moment where folks say we really need to do this. So I'm fairly encouraged by what I'm seeing.
We share your optimism there.
Yeah, if I could add for the nuclear power sector, we've had a lot of movement towards increasing the speed at which the Nuclear Regulatory Commission moves on the permits that we require. So when we uprate our units, we'll have to submit an application. The NRC has to review and approve that. At the same time, that investment allows us to extend the life of the unit. Nuclear units are licensed for an initial term of 40 years in the US, and they can have an additional 20 years tacked on serially. So we're doing that too. With the ADVANCE Act, with some of the executive orders, basically the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been charged by the administration to streamline and speed up all those processes that we go through with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we actually see that working in process. We extended the life of our Perry plant last year by 20 years, and that was done in a more timely manner without all of the past, I'll call it red tape that had to go along with that, because it's a tried and true process. So we see that happening, and what will really help all of us, I believe, in the market is certainty in timelines, right? If we're gonna bring a new small plant or large plant online, do the investors, do all the companies involved, do we have certainty in the timelines it'll take to get done? And that's what that drive of the executive orders is for. And we see the NRC really coming to the table and bringing that forward. If I get a little bit out of my swim lane, one thing I think also we need from the grid operators is transparency and realism in what this load, this coming load is going to do, right? I mentioned Texas ERCOT, where they said, hey, maybe as much as 300,000 additional megawatts, but they recognize not all of that's going to materialize. So how we and the regulators wade through all the different applications to get in the internet queue and tell all of us what's real and what's not, that's another reform I think we would advocate for, so that we don't end up overbuilding or with stranded assets, that we really know what's needed where, and we all do a good job in delivering that.
Roger, anything you want to add on how you communicate to policymakers about the imperative nature of permitting reform?
I think what we would add would be a global competitiveness angle to this. Like, this has been a discussion of optimism here on a Monday morning. We have the technology, we have the demand, we have the financing, we have the people, we have the workforce. The US is leading on all of this. But when we look with our global lens and we go around the world into the Middle East, into Asia and places like that, they're not debating permitting reform. They're getting it done, and they're just building it, and they're not worrying about it. And that, to me, is a real energy security risk. I think it's a competitiveness risk. We have all these great intentions. We all have this great progress. And I think you did a really nice job, like giving credit to the administration. We're seeing progress, but it needs to really meet the pace at which the world is moving. Because if we can't move at that pace, all of this optimism is going to be for nothing. So we just have a few simple messages like you. We say, all ships should rise. We shouldn't be picking winners or losers here. Let's solve this for everything. That the laws really need reform. They don't need to be fundamentally kind of redone. If we can focus on guarantees, certainties when it comes to timing, I think industry can live with that. We're not saying to abandon things. We're saying, but we need some help. We need some certainty there. And we'd also like to solve some rather than solve all. I think there is a little bit will they, won't they kind of mentality that's keeping people from moving forward. So let's solve for something, and then we can solve for the next thing. And so that global competitiveness is really where we try to just bring things into perspective outside the US on how serious of an issue this is.
So we've talked a lot about some really wonky topics here, things like interconnection queues. Communicating with Washington policymakers, maybe they start to understand it and understand the strategic value. When you get down to a local and a community level, there's a huge information gap, right? People don't necessarily understand how power gets built, how it gets approved, how it gets brought into the grid, how it gets utilized, and how new large loads, things like data centers, are actually going to impact the prices that they're going to pay when they get their power bill. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but can you guys just give a little more detail on how we think about closing that information gap and ensuring that the people who are going to have the most resistance to this understand the topics that are being presented to them? I don't know if, Gerry, you want to start that?
Yeah, I mean, one concrete example of this, it goes back to our community first AI infrastructure commitments I mentioned earlier, is the policy of NDAs in communities for the hyperscalers when they come in and build. It was essentially industry practice for a long time. Often a community wouldn't even know which company or companies were behind some of the AI infrastructure or data center infrastructure that was being built in their community. And we've ended that. We announced just a few weeks ago, we are not doing that anymore in the United States. And we think that's critical, right? We have to be able to go into a community and say, hey, this is, it's our company. Here's what we're committing to this community. Here's what it means for energy. Here's what it means for water and all the things I mentioned before. So, one thing that I'm hoping this announcement will do is propel the industry to think similarly, right? We need to be transparent. We need to talk to communities about these benefits. I also think my industry has not done a great job explaining what a data center does, right? If we're going to ask communities and we're going to put all this new energy generation into the United States and build these transmission plants to power data centers and other infrastructure, we need to explain what they do, right? And it's not just ChatGPT, right? A data center essentially allows us, you held up your phone before, Ken, right? I'll do the same thing. We can't use this every single day from morning to night without the data center, right? So our entire economy is run through cloud computing. And so, the ability to tell folks in a more responsible and informative way, hey, this is the infrastructure we're building and here's why it's important to you, right? Every time you sort of wake up and you check your calendar in the morning, you process a payment, you pay a bill, that's being powered by that local infrastructure we're building. I don't think my industry has done a good job of that, and we're working to fix it.
And you want to go next on that local engagement and how we think about that? I mean, you guys have had a lot of experience and success in this, right? How do you educate people about give them enough information about the changes that they might see coming to their communities and what it means for them, and tell that in a positive way?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to what Gerry said and what we said before too, right? Early engagement, meeting with all the stakeholders. And I think a key piece of that has to be a dialogue, right? Not just me or somebody else from the company going out to an audience and telling them, hey, there's this, and that. Like, it's got to be give and take. Let them ask questions. Let them understand what we're doing, why, what it means to the community. So that early engagement that invites true dialogue and understanding. And then, like I said earlier, the visits to the actual site, right? There's no seeing is believing, understanding what actually happens. If you've never been to a power plant or a data center, you probably don't have a good feel for what it is. So for our data center project, we invited county commissioners out to the power plant and to other data centers so they can actually see and understand, okay, these are the kinds of jobs created. Here are the activities that go on when in build mode or when in operate mode. So it's just bringing people in so you're very transparent and open with what you're doing.
Okay, I'm cognizant we're getting close on time, and I'm somewhat surprised that I think I've only heard China brought up once in the context of AI and competitiveness, so I want to change that a little bit. When we think about U.S. competing versus China, we oftentimes hear about how much new power generation China is bringing online, how many billions of dollars they're pouring into their grid and far outpacing the US, the advancements they're making on the AI side itself, data center buildouts. This contrast is oftentimes framed as innovation versus execution, with the US having the strength in technology and innovation and China having the speed and build out. Do you think that's an accurate assessment? And in the context of US competitiveness, which gap matters more for the US to be able to leverage and or close? Ken, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I can't speak definitively about China itself, but if you look at what's in the paper and how quickly they build, how widely they build, I would say for us on the nuclear, operating side and what it takes to build, there are probably two key things that I think are needed for us to speed the development, and maybe a couple sidebars. The first is the regulatory reform we talked about, and I think Roger hit it on the head, right? We see improvements, but it needs to happen at a much faster pace. And some of the challenges from the administration to the regulator are to do just that, right? What they've put out is a goal of having non-unique permits issued in 9 months, and for anything that has some uniqueness to it, 12 months. That's lightning speed compared to where we've been, so that will be very helpful in helping us execute more quickly. There is, and we need to call it like it is, right? For either small modular or large nuclear plants, there is a high upfront cost. So the government, through energy dominance financing, is trying to close the gap and share the risk among partners and investors in getting these plants built. I think that's critical also. And then, some things we don't talk about a lot are the supply chain, and there are efforts in the US through executive orders to help Roger's company and others like his, right, stand up a supply chain. We haven't gone through a large power plant build in a long time. So providing the impetus to get that supply chain going, and then where are we going to get the workforce, right? When you build a large or even a small modular reactor, you have thousands of people on your site. The craftsmen and craftswomen that built the Vogtle plant, they've dispersed, right? They've gone on to other building projects throughout the US. We need to do everything we can. I appreciate what Roger said, or maybe it was Gerry, working with the trade unions. We in the US nuclear industry are doing that, so we develop all the workforce we need to get this done.
Great, thank you. Roger?
Well, whether we're talking about China or beyond, as I mentioned, we're seeing these trends globally. This is the space race of our generation, right? And the world sees it that way. I probably worry more about Europe than I do the United States and the UK, but that doesn't mean I don't worry about the US despite all our progress. But I do go to places where the things we're talking about on the stage, the part of the SAFE Summit, are not even on the table. They don't need to talk about it because they just get done. That's what I worry about when I come back here. How do we match that speed given all the opportunity we have? So we've talked about permitting, we've talked about critical minerals, we've talked about workforce, and maybe the last thing I would add on there is policy durability, because I think we've all been recognizing the progress of a lot of these policies. But another thing, these markets that I see moving at different paces, they don't have the same stressors about policy durability. They'll set a plan for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, and they're going to stick to that plan, they're going to execute on it. And so what I worry a lot about in the United States is not currently maybe what's happening today so much, but how do we make sure we have the durability that these investments stick, and that someone can make a decision today knowing that investment's going to be here for a long, long time. And that's something I think we have to work on together to solve as well.
Yeah, and briefly, I'll just mention one component that we don't talk about a lot, which is, and especially in the geopolitical context, diffusion rates, and particularly with respect to AI diffusion. And what do I mean by that? So when you look historically at the societies, at the countries that most benefited from a new technology, think the electricity, the internet, things like that, it was those countries that actually diffused it throughout their economy, skilled and educated their people to use it. They're the ones that actually won the race, if you will. And sure, today, the United States leads in developing the most capable AI models. We do have the chips. We have the infrastructure, as we just discussed, and there are some challenges there. But when it comes to usage and skilling and the diffusion of the technology itself, we're not at the top of the list, right? So we put out a quarterly diffusion report out of Microsoft every 3 months, and we're somewhere in the middle of the pack, if you will, as far as usage. And if you look at polling, just in the past year, there's a lot of AI skepticism starting to creep in to how Americans view AI technologies. And so it's imperative that whether it's in our K through 12 schools, retraining and skilling inside of companies with the existing workforce, community colleges, we need to get folks educated and skilled on how to use this technology to help them in their everyday lives be more productive, because it's really like learning a new language in many respects. And so it's something that I think we all can do, but it's critical that we actually prioritize it as a country, because again, AI diffusion will really boil down to how are people using it, and is it spreading in a good and positive way throughout our economy.
Well, I appreciate it. There's so much more we could discuss on the topic of AI. I'll promise our audience, though, we're going to get a lot more into supply chain, U.S. competitiveness, advanced technologies, critical minerals, many of the topics we just touched on here. But I want to thank our panelists very much. I have left more optimistic than pessimistic about what we're going to see over the next couple of years when it comes to AI in the U.S., and look forward to what that's going to mean for our country. Thank you.
Thank you.